The last thing I did for my sister was zip up her suitcase. The cheap plastic zipper groaned in protest, straining against the sheer volume of designer clothes she'd systematically stolen from my closet over the past month. Each piece was a memory she was callously ripping away. The cashmere sweater Julian had bought me for my birthday, the silk blouse I had saved for months to buy, the dress I had planned to wear to our rehearsal dinner. Seeing them crammed into her luggage felt like watching a highlight reel of my own erasure. She stood before the mirror, applying a final, perfect coat of ruby red lipstick. My lipstick, of course. She met my eyes in the reflection, and her own glittered with a cruel, triumphant light. She was mistaking my serene calm for utter defeat, my silence for the shock of a broken heart. It was a miscalculation she would regret for the rest of her miserable life. "Don't look so tragic, Alara," she cooed, her voice a cloying blend of fake sympathy and undisguised glee. She turned from the mirror to face me, a vision of stolen finery. "It's not your fault, really. Julian just realized he wants a real woman, someone with a bit of fire. Not a boring little doormat who lives in the library." I forced my expression to remain placid, a carefully constructed mask of sorrow I had perfected over 2 decades of practice. Inside, a cold, hard knot of satisfaction tightened in my chest. Doormat. It was the same word she had used in my last life, whispering it to Julian in the hospital corridor as I lay dying, my body broken from the car wreck. I could almost feel the phantom ache in my ribs, hear the faint, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor that was about to flatline. The memory, once a source of unbearable agony, was now the fuel for my resolve. "He loves me, Alara," Lyra continued, preening as she adjusted the collar of my blouse. "He's crazy about me. We couldn't help it. This is true love. You wouldn't understand." "I understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I let a single, perfect tear trace a path down my cheek. It was a masterful touch, I thought, just enough to sell the performance. I wish he had told me himself. Her face hardened for a second, the predatory glee replaced by a flash of irritation that I wasn't dissolving into a hysterical puddle on the floor. "Well, he didn't want to hurt you," she lied smoothly. "He's too kind. That's why we decided this was for the best, a clean break." A clean break, like a snapped bone, like the severing of a lifeline. I nodded slowly, playing the part of the victim to perfection. I walked over to my dresser, opened a small wooden box, and pulled out a thick envelope of cash. It was thousands of dollars, money I had carefully saved from part-time jobs and tutoring gigs throughout college, the emergency fund I had hidden from my parents. I pressed it into her hand. "For the road," I said, my voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "Please, just be happy, Lyra. You deserve all the happiness you're about to receive." For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. She'd expected tears and screams, perhaps even a physical fight. She had not expected this quiet capitulation, this blessing accompanied by a small fortune. Greed quickly won out over suspicion. She snatched the envelope and stuffed it into her handbag. "Well, I guess you're not a total loss, little sister," she said, a smirk returning to her lips. She saw the money not as a kindness, but as my final act of servitude, an admission of her ultimate superiority. It was perfect. I walked her to the door of her room, a silent specter at her coronation. She paused at the threshold, turning back to me one last time. "Don't tell Mom and Dad until at least noon," she ordered. "We need a good head start. And don't try to call Julian. He's already blocked your number." "I won't," I promised. She gave me a final, pitying look, the kind one might give to a particularly pathetic stray animal, then turned and crept down the hallway. I stood there, listening to the soft click of the front door opening and closing. Then I walked to my bedroom window, which overlooked the long, curving driveway. A few moments later, the headlights of Julian's sleek sports car cut through the pre-dawn gloom. The passenger door opened and Lyra slid in. I could see her silhouette as she leaned over and kissed him, a long, passionate kiss full of stolen promises. They sped off, leaving a trail of exhaust and shattered illusions in their wake, laughing about the brilliant future they had just secured. My future, or so they believed. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, a genuine, predatory smile finally gracing my lips. They were running headfirst into the beautiful, intricate, and inescapable cage I had been building for them since the day I opened my eyes in a 5-year-old's body, screaming not from a nightmare but from a memory. It's a uniquely disorienting form of madness to wake up in a pink-frilled canopy bed, clutching a teddy bear you haven't seen in 20 years, with the phantom taste of hospital disinfectant and your own blood in your mouth. For the first few weeks of my second life, I was convinced I was in a coma, trapped in some bizarre, hyper-realistic dream of my own childhood. I was 5 years old again, but my mind was a repository of 25 years of life, a life defined by quiet suffering, thankless servitude, and a brutal, premature end. The triggers were everywhere. The scent of my mother's cloying perfume, the sound of my father's booming, indifferent laugh, the sight of my 7-year-old sister, Lyra, already a master of casual cruelty. I watched, trapped in a tiny body I could barely control, as the first bricks of my prison were laid all over again. I remember one afternoon with perfect, horrifying clarity. I was sitting on the living room floor, carefully building a tower of wooden blocks. I was concentrating, my 5-year-old tongue sticking out slightly. It was the most complex structure I had ever managed. Lyra came tearing through the room, a whirlwind of childish entitlement, and kicked it over with a gleeful shriek of laughter. The blocks scattered across the hardwood floor with a deafening clatter. Tears welled in my eyes, a genuine, childish burst of frustration and injustice. "Lyra, why did you do that?" I wailed. Our mother, Clarice, swept into the room, drawn by the noise. She didn't see my ruined tower or my tear-streaked face. She only saw Lyra, who had immediately put on a theatrical pout. "Elara, what did you do to your sister?" Clarice demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. "She kicked my blocks," I sobbed. "I did not," Lyra cried, her own eyes now filling with crocodile tears. "I was just running and she yelled at me. She's always so mean to me." Clarice rushed to Lyra's side, scooping her up into a comforting embrace. "Oh, my poor baby, don't you cry. Elara, you will apologize to your sister this instant. You know you need to be more gentle with her. She's sensitive." The injustice was so profound, so familiar, that it cut through the fog of my confusion. This had happened before. Not just this incident, but this pattern. Lyra's lie, my mother's immediate belief, my punishment. It was the foundational text of my childhood. In that moment, staring up at my mother coddling the sister who had just wronged me, I knew this was not a dream. This was real. I was back. And the entire miserable path was laid out before me, waiting for me to walk it all over again. That night, I lay awake in my canopy bed, the terror and grief of my first life crashing down on me. I remembered the years of being treated as a second-class citizen in my own home. Lyra was the masterpiece. I was the rough, disappointing draft. She was praised for her spirited nature when she threw tantrums. I was chided for being sullen when I quietly read a book. She received designer dresses for every holiday. I received her stained and slightly too small hand-me-downs. The financial neglect was a constant, grinding humiliation. The money our grandparents sent for our birthdays went into a joint children's account that was mysteriously empty whenever I needed new shoes, but always had enough for Lyra's riding lessons or trips to the mall with her friends. When I was 16, I won a local essay competition that came with a $500 prize. I was ecstatic, dreaming of buying my own laptop. My father, Marcus, congratulated me with a distracted pat on the head and promptly took the check. "We'll put this towards the family vacation fund," he announced at dinner. That summer, my parents took Lyra to Paris. I was sent to a budget summer camp because they explained I was more outdoorsy anyway. I remembered my desperate, pathetic attempts to win their affection. I became a model student, a ghost in the house who never caused trouble. My perfect report cards were met with a cursory, "That's nice, dear," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Lyra's latest social drama. I became the family servant, cleaning Lyra's messes, doing the chores she was supposed to do, all in the vain hope that my utility would one day be mistaken for worth. It never was. And then there was Julian. In my second life, seeing him again for the first time was like staring at my own murderer. It was at a country club mixer when I was 19. He was exactly as I remembered, tall, with lazy charm in his smile and a predator's calculation in his eyes. He zeroed in on me, the quiet, overlooked daughter of the social climbing Millers. He didn't see me. He saw a direct line to my maternal grandfather, Arthur Vance, and the Vance Industries fortune. I relived the nauseating hypocrisy of my parents' sudden approval. As soon as Julian von Rothberg showed interest, I was transformed from a piece of beige furniture into their prized possession. They bought me a new wardrobe, coached me on polite conversation, and paraded me in front of their friends. Our Ilara has snagged the von Rothberg heir. Their proud smiles screamed. They were selling me, and I was letting them, because in my first life, I had mistaken the attention for love. I had been so starved for affection that I willingly consumed poison, just because it was offered with a smile. Lying in that pink bed, the memories assaulted me. The affair, the confrontation in Julian's apartment, Lyra's smug face wrapped in his bedsheets. I remembered the cold, dismissive tone in Julian's voice as he explained it all away. It was always about the merger, Alara, the inheritance. I thought I could learn to love you, but Lyra, she's just so alive. Most vividly, I remembered the rain-slicked asphalt, the blinding glare of headlights, and the sound of twisting metal. I remembered the crushing pain in my chest, the feeling of my life bleeding out onto the cheap vinyl of my car seat. My last thought wasn't of love or family, it was a single agonizing word, unfair. A 5-year-old's body isn't meant to contain a 25-year-old's rage. A tidal wave of fury, grief, and indignation so powerful it left me shaking washed over me. I cried into my pillow, not silent, sad tears, but raw, guttural sobs of pure rage. I cried for the girl who was never loved, for the woman who was so carelessly destroyed. When the tears finally subsided, something new and hard had settled in their place. A diamond-sharp resolve. The universe had made a mistake. It had sent me back, and in doing so, had given my enemies a judge they would never see coming. They thought they were raising a doormat. I would be the ground that opened up and swallowed them whole. My second life would not be a tragedy. It would be a reckoning. My plan began with a whisper. I was 7 years old, 2 years into my second life, and my maternal grandfather, Arthur Vance, was visiting for his annual tense holiday dinner. Arthur was the bedrock of our family's finances, a self-made titan of industry who regarded my father as a charming but useless fop, and my mother as a flighty socialite. He was a stern, observant man whose approval my parents craved and whose disappointment they feared. In my first life, I was terrified of him. In this one, he was my only hope. Dinner was the usual excruciating affair. Lyra, now 9, held court, regaling the table with a wildly exaggerated story about her lead role in the school play, She Was a Tree. My parents hung on her every word, laughing and applauding as if she were a Broadway star. I sat silent, pushing food around my plate, playing the part of the invisible child they expected me to be. After dinner, my grandfather retreated to the study with a glass of whiskey and the evening paper, his nightly ritual to escape the cloying atmosphere of our house. This was my chance. I slipped away from the living room where my mother was trying to coax a clumsy piano recital out of Lyra and padded down the hall. I found him in his large leather armchair, frowning at the business section. The headline was about the unstoppable rise of Omnicorp, a tech darling whose stock had been soaring for months. I remembered its spectacular implosion from my first life. It was one of the biggest financial scandals of the decade. I stood in the doorway until he noticed me. "Well, Ilara," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't smile, but his eyes were not unkind. "Tired of the concert?" "Yes, Grandpa," I said quietly. I stepped into the room, my hands clasped behind my back. "I wanted to tell you something." "Oh, and what's that?" He folded the paper, giving me his full, intimidating attention. I took a deep breath. "You should sell your shares in Omnicorp," I said, my small voice unwavering. "All of them. Their CEO, Mr. Albright, has been faking the company's profits. He's going to be indicted for fraud. It will be on the news in 3 months. The stock will be worthless." He stared at me, his bushy gray eyebrows rising in stunned amusement. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "Is that so? And how on earth would a 7-year-old girl know something like that?" I looked him straight in the eye, channeling every ounce of my 25-year-old conviction into my gaze. "I have very good dreams," I said. "I dream about the future, and I saw it happen." He chuckled again, but it was softer this time. He was intrigued. He saw not a child, but a puzzle. Very good dreams, eh? You're an odd little thing, Alara, just like your grandmother was. He picked up his whiskey, still watching me over the rim of the glass. All right, I'll tell you what. I'll sell a few shares just to humor your dream. He didn't believe me, not really. But he was a man who played the odds, and he was curious. He sold a small block of his Omnicorp stock the next day. 3 months later, to the day, the news broke. The FBI raided Omnicorp headquarters. Jonathan Albright was led away in handcuffs. The market opened to a full-blown panic as the stock plummeted from $200 a share to less than 50 cents. It was wiped out. The next time my grandfather visited, there was no amusement in his eyes. There was only a profound, searching intensity. He took me into the study and shut the door. How did you know? He asked, his voice low. I stuck to my story. I dreamed it. He didn't press me on the mechanics of it. He was a pragmatist, more interested in results than in esoteric explanations. He saw an asset, an inexplicable but undeniably valuable resource, and he was smart enough to use it. That day, he opened a private, encrypted email account for me. If you have any more dreams, Alara, he said, his voice grim with purpose, you tell me, and only me. That was the beginning of our alliance. While my parents continued to overlook me, I was secretly becoming my grandfather's most trusted advisor. I fed him a steady stream of information gleaned from my past life. Which tech startup would boom? Which real estate bubble would burst? Which international treaty would shift the markets? I funneled him the winning lottery numbers for a minor jackpot, just enough for him to set up a secret trust fund in my name, a war chest no one else knew existed. By the time I was a teenager, he stopped questioning my insights and started teaching me how to leverage them. He taught me about corporate law, about hostile takeovers, about shell corporations and offshore accounts. He was sharpening me into a weapon, all while I maintained my cover at home as the quiet, bookish, unremarkable Alara. While my bond with my grandfather was my secret weapon, the daily battles at home remained. The turning point in my resolve, the moment my plan crystallized from a vague desire for revenge into a concrete strategy, came when I was 16. I had spent my entire sophomore year working on a project for the National Science Fair. It was a complex environmental study on local water pollution, and it had consumed my life. I won first place. The prize was a $10,000 university scholarship. For a fleeting moment, I felt a spark of hope that this, finally, would be an achievement my parents couldn't ignore. I was wrong. At dinner that night, I presented them with the award letter. My father glanced at it. $10,000, he said, a thoughtful look on his face. That's very useful. I know, I said, my voice bright with excitement. It's a huge help for my tuition fund. My mother laughed, a light tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, Alara, don't be silly. Your grandfather will handle your tuition. You're the smart one. He'll see it as a good investment. She reached across the table and patted my hand. What this means is that we finally have the money for Lyra's rhinoplasty. She's been so self-conscious about her nose, poor thing. Now she can have it done this summer. Lyra, who had been sulking about my victory, lit up. Really? Oh, Mommy, thank you. I just stared at them, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. They were going to take my scholarship, the reward for a year of my hard work, and use it to pay for my perfectly attractive sister's cosmetic surgery. The audacity, the sheer, unthinking selfishness of it was breathtaking. Buddy, it's my scholarship, I said, my voice small. It's for my education. My father sighed, the sound of a deeply put-upon man. Alara, don't be selfish. Your sister's confidence is important for her future. A pretty girl with confidence can go far. You have your books. It all evens out. We are a family and we support each other. Their twisted logic was impenetrable. In their eyes, I was being selfish for wanting what I had earned. Lyra was the one in need, and my resources were simply family assets to be distributed to her. That night, I emailed my grandfather. I told him what happened. His reply was succinct. The evidence is noted. The plan will be adjusted accordingly. Not one more cent goes to them through you. It was then that we began to build the trap in earnest. We knew that my parents' ultimate goal was to marry me, and by extension Lyra, into a wealthier, more influential family. Julian von Rothberg, or someone like him, was an inevitability. My foreknowledge meant we knew the exact wolf who would come to the door. In a series of clandestine meetings at his downtown office, my grandfather and I, along with his phalanx of razor-sharp corporate lawyers, drafted the new Vance Family Trust. It was a masterpiece of legal warfare. Publicly, it seemed simple. The bulk of the Vance fortune and the controlling shares of the company would pass to me upon a suitable marriage. It was designed to look like a standard dynastic arrangement, one that would make me an irresistible target for a fortune hunter like Julian. But buried deep in the bylaws were the poison pills. The Alara Clause, as the lead attorney jokingly called it, stipulated that the inheritance was contingent on my continued well-being and was subject to my grandfather's, and later my own, discretion. Any demonstrable act of betrayal, infidelity, or abuse by my spouse or immediate family would render the entire trust null and void for all parties involved except for me. We also included the penalty clauses for any business contracts, like a potential merger with von Rothberg Industries that were entered into on the basis of my marriage. This ensures that if the boy cheats, his family pays, my grandfather explained, a grim smile on his face as we sat in the boardroom. I was 17, sitting at a table with men 3 times my age, and I felt more at home than I ever did in my own house. But it's not enough for them to lose, I said, my voice quiet but firm. The lawyers looked at me, surprised. I don't want them to just fail. I want them to be ruined by their own greed. I want them to pull the trigger themselves. My grandfather nodded, understanding perfectly. And so they shall, my dear. And so they shall. The final phase of the plan began, as I knew it would, at the annual Sinclair Charity Gala, the premier social event of the season. At 19, I was officially on the societal stage, and my parents were determined to make a show of it. My mother had forced me into a pale lilac gown that washed me out, while Lyra was a vibrant siren in crimson. The strategy was clear. Lyra was the spectacle, and I was the drab, respectable backdrop against which she could shine. It suited my purposes perfectly. Julian von Rothberg arrived like a scripted character entering on cue. He was 23, fresh out of business school, and had been installed as a vice president at his father's struggling company. He moved with an easy, predatory grace, his eyes scanning the room not for a partner, but for an opportunity. I watched him from across the ballroom, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. I saw the way he greeted my father with a practiced, deferential warmth, the way he charmed my mother with a comment about her necklace, the way his eyes slid over me with a brief flicker of assessment before landing and staying on Lyra. I felt a phantom chill, a memory of the naive girl who had been utterly captivated by this performance. This time, I saw the gears turning. I was a name on a list, Elara Vance Miller, granddaughter of Arthur Vance. He needed an introduction, an inroad. I played my part. When my father proudly steered him in our direction, I gave him a shy, fluttering smile and a timid handshake. I let my eyes drop to the floor, the picture of an intimidated wallflower. Julian, this is my eldest, Lyra, my father boomed, pushing her forward, and my youngest, Alara. The order, as always, was deliberate. A pleasure to meet you both, Julian said, his charming smile firmly in place. His eyes, however, were doing a cold calculation. He directed a few polite questions at me about my studies, which I answered in quiet, monosyllabic sentences. Then he turned the full force of his charisma on Lyra. I watched her blossom under his attention, her laughter becoming louder, her gestures more dramatic. They were 2 of a kind, vain, shallow, and pathologically selfish, a perfect match. Over the next few months, Julian began his campaign. He courted me, he sent flowers, took me to quiet, expensive restaurants, and sat through art films he clearly found mind-numbingly boring. He was building his portfolio, establishing himself as a suitable suitor. To my parents, he was the perfect gentleman. To me, he was a ticking bomb. All the while, the real seduction was happening right under their noses, a clandestine drama I myself was directing. I became a master of strategic retreat. I would invite Julian to family dinners only to develop a migraine halfway through, leaving him alone at the table with my parents and a very attentive Lyra. I'd talk to him on the phone, then lament that I had to go study, but add, Oh, Lyra's right here and she's dying to tell you about the party last night. Let me put her on. My greatest performance was the accidental diary discovery. I bought a cheap, girlish-looking journal and filled it with saccharine, cringe-worthy entries. I wrote about my profound love for Julian, but also my deep-seated insecurities. He's so exciting and worldly, I wrote. I worry my love of books and quiet nights is too boring for him. A man like Julian needs a firecracker, someone more like Lyra. Sometimes I see the way he looks at her and my heart just breaks with fear. I left it on my bed, knowing Lyra's snooping habits were as predictable as the sunrise. That evening, I saw a new, confident cruelty in her eyes. The diary had confirmed her own narcissistic beliefs. Of course Julian wanted her. I was just the unfortunate obstacle. The real work, however, was happening far from the drawing rooms and dinner parties. My grandfather and I had moved on to the next phase, baiting the larger trap for our true targets. With my foreknowledge, Vance Industries executed a series of brilliant acquisitions, making our company's stock soar. We were the talk of the financial world. At the same time, I had dreamed that the primary sector von Rothberg Industries relied upon was about to enter a steep, unexpected recession. My grandfather, acting on my tip, began to quietly short their stock through a series of anonymous hedge funds. We were bleeding them dry, even as Julian was planning to marry me to save them. The von Rothbergs grew more desperate, and their desperation made them careless. They rushed the engagement, urging Julian to lock me down. All of this culminated in my parents making the single stupidest decision of their lives. I overheard them one night through the heating vent that connected my room to their study. "The loans are approved," my father said, his voice thick with a strange mix of terror and excitement. "We're leveraged to the hilt, Clarice. Everything, the house, the portfolio, it's all riding on this merger." "It's a sure thing, Marcus," my mother replied, her voice smooth as silk. "Once Laura and Julian are married, the deal with Vance Industries will make us wealthier than we ever dreamed. This is just a bridge loan, a way to secure our position. We have to spend money to make money." I lay on my floor, my ear pressed to the vent, a cold smile spreading across my face. They had done it. They had willingly placed their own necks in the noose. All I had to do was hand the rope to Lyra. The proposal came on my 20th birthday. Julian took me to a cliched French restaurant, got down on one knee, and presented me with a gaudy 2-carat diamond. It must have cost him one of the last vestiges of his liquid assets. I produced the requisite tears of joy. I said yes. I let him slide the ring onto my finger, the cold metal feeling like the shackle of a locked cage. His cage, not mine. The engagement party was a grand affair. It was there that I set the final piece in motion. I cornered Lyra in the powder room. I was a mess of fake nerves, wringing my hands and biting my lip. "I'm so scared, Lyra," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "I love him so much, but I don't think I'm enough for him. He's so passionate, and I'm—" "Boring," she finished for me, her voice devoid of sympathy. She was reapplying her lipstick in the mirror, looking at my reflection with disdain. "He needs someone like you," I continued, my voice breaking. "Someone exciting. Last night he was talking in his sleep. He said your name." That was the final push she needed. The lie, so perfectly tailored to her ego, erased any lingering shred of sisterly guilt she might have possessed. It transformed her from a jealous sister into a romantic heroine in her own mind. She was rescuing Julian from a life of quiet desperation. From that moment on, their affair escalated. They grew reckless, convinced of their own cleverness. They thought I was the naive fool. My parents were the oblivious socialites, and my grandfather was a distant, doddering old man. They had no idea they were rats in a maze of our design, and that every path they chose led to the same inevitable end. In the final week before the wedding, as my mother dragged me to endless dress fittings and cake tastings, I was a ghost of a bride. My mind was elsewhere, running through the final checklists. The private investigator had a mountain of evidence. My grandfather's lawyers had the paperwork ready to file. My secret trust fund was secure. All the dominoes were lined up, waiting for the first one to fall, and I knew it would be Lyra who would push it. 2 days before the wedding, just as in my first life, she and Julian would make their move. This time, however, it wouldn't be a shocking betrayal. It would be a scheduled demolition, and I had already lit the fuse. The morning of the elopement unfolded with the beautiful, grim precision of a state execution. I rose at dawn, as I always did, and went through my routine. I showered, dressed, and made a pot of tea, the picture of tranquility. I sat in the kitchen, sipping the hot liquid, listening to the silence of the house. It was the deep, still silence before a storm. I had set every charge and laid every wire. All that was left was to press the detonator. At precisely 11:55 a.m., 5 minutes before Lyra's deadline, I went upstairs and knocked on my mother's bedroom door. "Mom," I called, injecting a note of carefully rehearsed panic into my voice. "Have you seen Lyra? She's not in her room and she's not answering her phone." That was the spark. My mother emerged, her face a mask of annoyance that quickly morphed into genuine alarm when she saw Lyra's empty, perfectly made bed. On the pillow, placed exactly where I had left it after Lyra had carelessly discarded it, was the note. It was written on my own expensive stationery, a final petty theft. My mother snatched it up and read it, her face contorting through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, incandescent rage. A shriek tore from her throat, a sound of such pure fury that it brought my father running from his study, his face pale. He read the note over her shoulder, his complexion shifting from pale to a dangerous mottled purple. But when he finally looked up, his eyes blazing with fury, they were fixed not on the empty space his favorite daughter had occupied, but squarely on me. "You!" he bellowed, stalking towards me and jabbing a finger in my face. "You knew about this. You must have. You let her go." "What? No, I didn't know anything," I stammered, shrinking back in a convincing display of fear. My mother crumpled the note in her fist. "Don't lie, Alara. Lyra wouldn't do this unless you drove her to it. You were always so jealous of her, so resentful of her bond with Julian. You probably filled his head with lies about her." They descended on me like vultures, their voices rising in a cacophony of blame. I had humiliated them. I had ruined the family. I had single-handedly destroyed the Von Rothberg merger that was meant to be their crowning social achievement. It was a torrent of abuse, a condensed version of my entire life's soundtrack. I stood there and took it, letting their accusations wash over me. I needed them to be like this. I needed their rage to be focused entirely on me, so the blows that were about to land would be all the more disorienting. In the middle of their tirade, my father's phone rang. His face softened instantly when he saw the caller ID. It was Lyra. He put it on speaker, a triumphant "I told you so" sneer directed at me. "Lyra, darling, are you all right?" he asked, his voice dripping with concern. "We're more than all right, Daddy. We're married." Lyra's voice bubbled with breathless joy. Julian's laughter echoed in the background. "We just couldn't wait. It was so romantic. We drove all night." My parents' transformation was instantaneous and grotesque. The rage vanished, replaced by a syrupy, fawning adoration. "Oh, my sweet girl," my mother cried, snatching the phone. "You followed your heart. I'm so proud of you. Don't you worry about a thing. We'll handle everything." "That's right," my father added, taking the phone back. "We'll call the Von Rothbergs and explain. They'll come around. They'll see you were the superior choice all along. More spirit. A much better match for their heir." They spent the next 10 minutes cooing over the newlyweds, promising them a lavish reception, assuring them that their brave and passionate act would soon be the talk of the town for all the right reasons. They were building a beautiful castle of denial in the sky. I stood by the window watching them and felt the first tremor as the foundations began to crack. The tremor became an earthquake precisely 1 hour later. My father's phone rang again. It was a number he knew well. "It's Alistair von Rothberg," he whispered to my mother, his chest puffing out. "Time to smooth the waters." He answered with a hearty, confident laugh. "Alistair, I suppose you've heard the news about our little runaways?" He was cut off. The voice on the other end was not warm or conciliatory. It was a blade of Arctic ice. I could hear every single clipped word from across the room. "Marcus," Mr. von Rothberg's voice sliced through the speaker. "Let me be perfectly clear. My son Julian has brought an unforgivable stain upon my family's name. His actions are not those of a romantic, but of a common thief and a dishonorable fool. Effective immediately, he is disowned. He has been removed from the company, his name has been struck from the family trust, and his access to all family funds and assets has been terminated. The authorities have been notified that the vehicle he is driving is a stolen asset. Do you understand me? My father's face had gone completely white. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Furthermore, the icy voice continued, our proposed merger was contingent on an alliance with a family of integrity and honor. You have proven to be the opposite. All proposed business between our families is, of course, terminated. My legal team has already been in contact with Arthur Vance's office regarding the significant financial penalties for this contractual breach. Do not contact me or my family again. The line went dead. The phone slipped from my father's numb fingers and crashed onto the marble floor. My mother stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my mother's ragged breathing. Their castle in the sky had just been vaporized. Before either of them could process the first cataclysm, the second arrived. The doorbell rang. Our housekeeper, looking confused, came in moments later holding a large, crisp envelope from a legal courier. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Miller. My father opened it with trembling hands. Inside were two documents. He read the first one, his eyes scanning the dense legal text with a look of dawning horror. "What is it?" my mother whispered, her voice thin. It's from your father," he choked out. "It's a notice. He's invoking the morality clause in the Vance Trust. It says, for malicious complicity in a scheme to emotionally and financially defraud your daughter, Ilara Vance Miller, we are hereby and irrevocably disinherited." My mother let out a strangled gasp and snatched the second document. Her eyes widened in terror. "Marcus, this can't be right. This is a foreclosure notice on the house. It says all our loans have been called in, due in full, but our bank wouldn't—" She trailed off as she read the bottom of the letterhead. The bank, it's owned by a holding company, a subsidiary of Vance Industries. It was the final elegant checkmate. My grandfather owned their debt. They were ruined, utterly and completely. My mother sank to the floor, a low, guttural wail of despair escaping her lips. My father simply stood there, a hollowed-out statue of a man, staring at the pieces of paper that had just dismantled his entire existence. And then, as if on cue from a divine playwright, my phone began to ring. I looked at the screen. It was Lyra. I let it ring twice before answering, putting it on speaker for my parents to hear. "Alara!" Her voice was no longer joyful, it was a high-pitched, panicked shriek. "Something's wrong. Julian's card was declined at the hotel. They kicked us out. Then another card and another. His father called and screamed at him. He said he was disowned. The police just pulled us over and told us the car is stolen. They're going to arrest us. This is your fault. I know you did something." I walked calmly to the center of the room, standing before my broken parents. I looked from my mother's tear-streaked face to my father's vacant stare. "Yes, Lyra," I said, my voice as cool and clear as a winter morning. "I did. You and Julian wanted my fiancé. So I gave him to you. A man whose only value was his family name and his family's money, both of which are now gone." There was a stunned, sputtering silence on the other end of the line. "You see, you thought you were stealing a prize stallion, but he was just a donkey I decorated with a blue ribbon. His family was on the verge of bankruptcy. The merger with Vance Industries was their last hope, and it was only ever going to happen if the groom was married to me. When you married him, you didn't steal my fortune, you sealed his ruin. As for the inheritance you thought you were getting," I continued, my voice merciless, "you should know that I've been Grandpa Arthur's primary business advisor for the last 13 years. The Vance Trust was rewritten long ago. You and our parents were explicitly cut out. The house you grew up in, the cars you drive, all the money you've been living on, it was all leveraged against a future that was never going to happen. And as of 10 minutes ago, Grandpa owns your debt. You have nothing. You are nothing." I let the full weight of her new reality sink in. I could hear her ragged, desperate breaths and Julian yelling in the background. "I helped you pack, sister. I said, my voice dropping to a confidential whisper. I gave you money for your getaway. I wished you all the happiness you deserved. You should have asked yourself why the treasure you were so desperate to steal was left completely unguarded. You weren't clever thieves, you were just the designated trash collectors. Enjoy your new life together. You've earned every second of it. I hung up the phone, cutting off the shriek of pure, impotent rage that was just beginning to erupt. The climax was over. The silence that filled the room was the silence of total, absolute victory.